Thanks. Good morning, everybody over there, and thanks, Juan, and to the organizers of the program for inviting me to give this presentation. So I'm going to talk maybe a little redundant with what Dan started out saying, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the Raptor Research Foundation, its past, present, and future. And there aren't many scientific talks, at least about birds, that begin with a diagram of a chemical molecule. But if you look back at how the Raptor Research Foundation got started, this is really it. This is the chemical DDT, which was invented in the 1940s. It's a wonderful drug or pesticide for killing all sorts of insects, including mosquitoes. And so it has huge health benefits for people in areas where there's lots of malaria and other mosquito-borne diseases. And of course, it was promulgated as a magic chemical. It was good for everybody. Well, it was good for everybody except birds on the tops of long food chains. So this is in the 1950s, we began to see the declines of birds like brown pelicans, peregrine falcons, bald eagles, and ospreys. And what was happening, and it took us a while to figure it out, eggshells were becoming thin. And the data on the right here from Ian Newton and Haas from 1984 clearly shows how the eggshell thickness in European sparrowhawks declined dramatically shortly after DDT began to be used in the United Kingdom. The picture on the left is a pelican egg that's too thin and it was crushed under the weight of the incubating female. Lots goes on. The first thing that happens actually with eggshell thinning is there are problems for the embryo. So even before eggshells became too thin, so thin that they were being broken by incubating females, avian embryos weren't developing and hatching successfully. Embryos have to breathe through the eggshell. And so there are tiny pores, so oxygen can get in because the embryo in there is oxidizing its food in the form of the yolk sac, and it has to get rid of carbon dioxide. So some gaseous exchange has to go on through the eggshell. While that's happening, water vapor is also escaping from the egg. And when the eggs get too thin, the pores get too wide, and the eggs lose too much weight. And so that becomes a problem. So even before eggshells started to break under the weight of incubating females, young birds were not hatching successfully. So this was becoming pretty obvious to, especially to falconers who had a number of known eyries they would visit to take a young falcon to train in falconry. And by the early 1960s, there were no peregrine eyries active east of the Mississippi River in the United States. And in the early 60s, a number of falconers began to sort of talk about this, and they realized it's something that they had to do something about it. In 1965, Joe Hickey convened a symposium of a group of raptor biologists and falconers who had been studying the peregrine falcon and knew it well. And they put together a classic volume of collected papers on the biology of the peregrine falcon in the United States, North America, and what was going on with the decline. So I've come up with this little equation for how the Raptor Research Foundation was created. So you take a bunch of DDT being spread in the environment, you subtract peregrine falcons from the environment, you add a bunch of passionate falconers who are aware of the problem, who really know the birds well enough to think about captive breeding and realize that that was going to be necessary. And when you put all of those together in 1966, you have the Raptor Research Foundation being formed. So the mission of the Raptor Research Foundation is to advance the science, conservation, and understanding of birds of prey. The organization early on had a Raptor Research newsletter, which was not a referee journal, but just simply an exchange of information. And much of the information that was being passed around through the newsletter was about captive breeding and reintroduction efforts, especially for the peregrine falcon. So how do you go about saving the peregrine falcon or other species that are in trouble? Well, first you've got to captive breed them in numbers. And falconers were able to do that because they were so intimately involved with the birds that they were training. And this picture, I'm cheating a little bit here because these are orange-breasted falcons. And this is Bob Berry, who was one of the pioneers of captive breeding in birds of prey. He wrote a series of papers on captive breeding goshawks back in the early 1960s, mid 1960s. And this is great reading, goshawks being as psychotic as they are. When Bob's stories of the whole captive breeding experiment with his goshawks is a little bit of a psycho thriller that's worth tracking down if you have the opportunity. The next step, of course, was we had to get rid of DDT. You've got to get rid of the problem in the environment. In 1972, DDT was banned. And then you've got to reintroduce the species from the parts of the range where it was extirpated. So the first efforts at reintroduction were out logically in places where peregrines had bred before, but those first efforts were, for the large part, unsuccessful because great horned owls were everywhere that they were trying to release peregrines, and the great horned owls would kill the young peregrines once they left the nest early in the breeding cycle, and they didn't have their parents to defend them. So the captive reintroduction programs had to shift to places where great horned owls weren't. And one of those places were out on marshes on the East Coast. So the Peregrine Fund, who was in charge of the reintroduction program, constructed these strange structures out on the marshes and built hack boxes to release the young. And then they had the idea of going into cities where great horned owls are not present. And those two efforts were remarkably successful in getting peregrine falcons started. And eventually peregrines got going back in the old traditional eyries away from the cities and the marshes. And some of those reintroduction programs were successful as well. And then the ultimate success of the whole program was that peregrine falcons were taken off the U.S. endangered species list. And this is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service monitoring plan for the American peregrine falcon after it's been recovered from the Endangered Species Act. And this is one of the very few species that has been removed from the endangered species list. Right now, there are peregrines, 1,500 peregrines were seen in one day at a Florida Hawkwatch site a few years ago. And in some regions, it's easier to see a peregrine falcon than it is to see an American kestrel. And that's sort of good news, bad news. It's amazing that that's true, which is good news for the peregrine, but it also brings up another conservation issue, that what's going on with the American kestrel, which is another mystery that we're working on. So I tell that long story because so many of the people that were involved in that whole process were members of the Raptor Research Foundation, including the founders were behind that whole effort. And that is sort of a signal achievement for the organization and its members. So a little bit about Raptor Research Foundation today. We've got about 1,000 members from 49 countries, mostly in the US, but we've got about 10% in Europe and 3% or so from Latin America. And then, of course, we've got members scattered around the rest of the globe, including in Asia. Lucia Severinghaus in Taiwan was one of our board members until very recently. We have a healthy student population, 15%. Whenever you're looking at population structure, you like to see a good number in the lowest age class. So we're pleased with the number of students that are members at Raptor Research, and we spend a lot of time and our resources sponsoring students, mentoring them. We've got a number of programs for what we call the early career Raptor researchers So we're really making a big effort to keep those, to foster the careers of those young raptor researchers that are coming into our organization. We spend about $200,000 a year, at least last year. That our budget was up a bit, but that was our budget for last year. This is probably the most boring slide you'll see in the talk, but this is sort of the structure of raptor research. The president, there are 4 officers under the president, 12 directors, and 20 committees, all volunteer, take care of all of the sort of behind the scenes operations that go on in the organization. Our biggest or our main venue for disseminating knowledge about the biology and conservation of raptors is our journal, which is now 2022 will be the volume 56 of the journal. Now, conservation, we're not a really dedicated conservation foundation. Conservation is at the heart of what we do, but we're not on the forefront. We're not an advocacy organization. So our main conservation outreach effort is through a series of conservation letters that we publish in the journal. And coincidentally, the most recent conservation letter happens to have been about the Philippine eagle, appropriately enough for this conference. And in those conservation letters, we collect, convene a panel of experts on a particular topic and try to pull together all of the relevant science that's available about that particular topic and put it in one place and make it easily accessible. And then we make that available through the publication of the journal, in the journal, to advocacy groups and to policy decision makers. And we hope that we can not be the driving force in policy creation, but we hope to provide the best scientific information so that the best decisions are made about policies that are relevant to birds of prey. Our website, the Raptor Research Foundation's website, has a brand new skin. It's exciting. We have this strange snowy owl that sort of weirds me out because it seems to have too many appendages. With that wing straight up, it looks more like a dorsal fin than a wing to me. And anyway, the exciting new website. We hope that you will visit that. Lots of information about the organization there. We have a members portal, and you can join Raptor Research Foundation either through the members portal or on the main website. And we hope that some of your organization will join us. I know we already have some members, but we would love to have more from your neck of the woods. Conferences, we've had 55 in North America and 9 in Europe, Mexico, and South America and Africa. Of course, we were supposed to have a joint conference with the Asian Raptor Research and Conservation Network, but COVID got in the way, and we really hope that we can work something out to have a joint conference in the future. Our conferences are nothing, or just like yours. We have plenary talks, paper sessions, poster sessions, workshops, social events, and field trips where members can get together and make new friends, meet old friends, and exchange ideas before they've become published. Typically, we have about 200 to 400 members at a meeting. Occasionally, we have more. Last year, when we went virtual, we had 638, I think, from all around the world. So it was an interesting experience, and we're expecting this year and probably into the future to have some sort of hybrid meetings where we will have the event will be in person, but we will have access through internet, Zoom, or whatever to people who can't attend the conference. We give a number of awards and grants. Awards are typically given to researchers who have spent a career advancing the biology and conservation of birds of prey. And we give grants, and this work turns out mostly to young researchers. So this year, we gave out $7,500 worth of grants to researchers in 5 different countries on 4 different continents. So we had a $1,000 award going out to studies the white rump vulture in Nepal, $2,500 for studies of the African whiteback vultures in South Africa, $2,500 to studies of the northern hawk owl in Canada, $1,000 to studies of the Andean condor in Peru, and $1,000 to studies of migrating raptors in Colombia. So looking at what's going to happen to raptor research in the future, we have a new program called Wings to Fly that will be kicked off this year. It's so new that we haven't worked out the details, but this will be an annual stipend for international travel to attend our annual meetings. And we're going to begin to work, we're going to work out the details soon. So we hope that your members will check in on our website in February and see what the details are, and perhaps some of your members can come and present the results of their research at our next conference, which will be in Florida in October. We have a new grant, the Michele Panuccio grant, which we're going to award for the first time this year. And that's going to go to researchers, young researchers in Western Europe, looking at studies of raptor migration. So again, soaring into the future, we really hope that we can expand our footprint and get more and more members in Asia and Australia. We'd like to be even more international than we already are. And we're hoping that we can continue to collaborate with ARRCN in the future, and hopefully in person at a meeting in the not too distant future. So again, with apologies for mixing up the time zones, I will thank you again for the invitation, the opportunity to speak to you, and looking forward to working together. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.